A record number of military veterans are expected to take part in the Paralympics in Rio de Janeiro later this year.
Over recent years, attitudes towards injured servicemen have changed immensely. In the First and Second World Wars, tens of thousands lost limbs, injuries many of them tried to hide.
Breakfast Jay McCubbin's been to meet Ted and Mark, two servicemen from different decades, to compare their stories.
Mark was a career soldier. He'd served in Bosnia, Afghanistan and Iraq. But on a training exercise in Canada, he was shot in a freak accident.
I was resuscitated on no less than about 6 occasions. I think the longest I was gone for was about 5 minutes.
Really?
Yeah. To be honest, the leg's a small price to pay.
The accident cost him his leg and, for a time, his drive.
Come on, spin around. Let's see a pose.
Until the discipline of bodybuilding became his new purpose.
Hey Ted, nice to meet you.
Today we brought Mark to meet Ted, a veteran who lost his leg 60 years ago. What, if anything, has changed for amputee veterans in all those years?
That's about as high as you'll get, I'm afraid. This part here is aluminium. Well, this particular one, I think, is about 45 years old. It's my best friend. This is the one I wear all the time, really.
The prosthetics have changed, but Ted says so too has our attitude to them.
We now sort of predominantly wear shorts. When you lost your leg, was it something that you had to sort of almost hide away, or?
We just wore normal trousers, and that's how it was, really. We want to appear like everybody else. We had to prove ourselves. I think it's more acceptable to people now because you had the Invictus Games, you had all these sort of things which shows amputees as they are, you know, not as a cripple. So you could go around like that and do what Mark's doing, you know. To badge you onto that is, you know, he's done well.
Mark has gone from wounded to recovery to champion. The second Invictus Games will be held in May. I'm told record numbers of British veterans will compete in the Rio Paralympics. Society may be more accepting, but not everything, they tell me, is better.
How do you think the NHS treatment is now compared to when you was actually in the forces still at Headley Court?
I think the NHS has struggled to cope with the amount of amputees. I've got several friends who are no longer serving, who've been discharged like myself, who have found themselves back in wheelchairs.
I think it's a disgusting situation.
Prosthetics have come a long way since these tested by World War I veterans. And £30 million has been invested by this government for the latest generation of wounded. But there is concern.
Then you get a nice side-by-side, legs with pride.
Still, what was once hidden is now in plain sight.
I was taking a mick out of me when I said it, I'll tell you.
And both believe that is for the better. Jay McCubbin, BBC News.
It was lovely seeing them together. Let's discuss this with Ian Waller from Blesma, the charity for limbless veterans. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Lovely to see them and to see as well that in many ways attitudes have changed quite a lot.
Absolutely, attitudes have changed. You know, the Paralympic Games, of which Blesma was at the forefront back in the 50s when he was at Stoke Mandeville. So yes, and the first thing to see those guys there on the TV, it's just typical of the fellowship of the disabled helping the disabled. And the way that attitudes have changed now is that, you know, they see themselves as not being disabled, and it's all about their ability to get on and lead independent and fulfilling lives.
And yet there are amazing achievements by many of them, and yet there are still issues. We heard there the idea that the NHS treatment is perhaps not what it could be, that they're struggling to cope with the number of amputees, that some of them are ending up back in wheelchairs.
Absolutely, and that is still the issue. It's world-class service that they get through the defence recovery at Headley Court and before that at Birmingham. But they're looked after, and it's a conveyor belt, so they know what's coming and they know what to expect. But by the time they get out into the NHS, along with 5,000 other civilian amputees each year, the service isn't the same. It's patchy, and whilst there's money for components, the expertise isn't always there.
So what are you saying, that there might be the money for the prosthetic limbs, but not necessarily the expertise to fit them? What do you mean?
Yeah, through the Veterans Prosthetic Panel, they've actually enabled funds to be channeled to 9 prosthetic centres, limb centres around the country. And so there's money to buy the kit for the ex-servicemen and women, but there's not necessarily always the expertise in terms of the prosthetists to be able to fit it in the right way and in a timely way within the NHS. It's
People
not the
wonder,
same.
though, if it could happen at Headley Court, why can't it happen everywhere?
I think it's about resource, it's about trained personnel, it's about having those trained personnel in the right place at the right time and competing priorities across the NHS.
So what's your advice to people if they're not getting perhaps the service that they've had before? What would your advice be?
Well, our members are very good at telling us when they think things aren't working. We have a welfare system that's out there supporting them and going along to the limb centres. But we're campaigning, we're pushing the government all of the time, whether that's through the MOD or the NHS, to improve what's available.
Okay. Ian, thanks very much. Ian Waller from Blesma. Thank you.
Thank you. You are watching BBC Breakfast. Time now to get the news, the travel and the weather wherever you are this morning. Back in a couple of minutes.